Me now is the former UN Appeals Judge Geoffrey Robertson, QC. Thank you for coming in. A lot of talk of war crimes against Tony Blair. Cutting through the waffle, is there any law, first of all, under which he might be prosecuted?
No, prosecution is impossible for this reason, that there is a crime of waging aggressive war. We did the Nazis for it, for invading Poland and Czechoslovakia. But it was not in play in 2003 because the states of the world, when they set up the International Criminal Court, said the crime of aggression cannot be prosecuted until we define it properly. And that didn't happen until 2010, and there have not been sufficient ratifications. It may come into play next year, 2017, and we lawyers have an absolute rule against what we call retrospective criminal prosecution. So,
how did Nuremberg happen then?
Because Nuremberg happened because they were prosecuted for the crime of aggression, and that is the crime that was committed in the sense that the law was unlawful. It was a breach of the UN Security Council, UN Charter. We didn't have Security Council support. There wasn't a case of self-defense. Chilcot and everyone else found there was no imminent danger of attack. There was not a humanitarian intervention. It was simply a breach of the UN Charter. So, unfortunately, if you like, the crime of aggression, which was used at Nuremberg, was in suspension. It had been put on hold until the International Criminal Court defined it. They had no power to prosecute it in 2003, and so they have no power to prosecute Mr. Blair now.
The other charge with a small c being talked about is a misconduct in public office.
I think that's ridiculous, and I think it's rather irresponsible to encourage people to think that Blair might be prosecuted for that. You've just heard that the Chilcot report found that he acted in good faith. Certainly he didn't invite Gordon Brown onto the sofa, and he made a number of mistakes, which he's admitted, but he was misled by the intelligence. He acted sincerely. That was part of his problem, actually. And so I don't think that misconduct in public office is a runner. And there is a danger that if the families are suckered into taking some obscure case or charge, it will be thrown out and they'll find headlines, Blair innocent or Blair not guilty. What has, I think, punished Mr. Blair are the headlines this morning, particularly in the papers that egged him on to war. They've now been the most vicious. His legacy, and he did a lot of good things, is now imperiled by this very bad mistake. Now, if the families want a memorial to their children, if they want their children's deaths to mean something, surely they've got a lot of moral force. They should go to Mr. Cameron. They should say, introduce into English law the crime of waging aggressive war and ratify the International Criminal Court's power to bring future leaders to justice. Because that way, I think that if the crime of aggression had been in force in 2003, Mr. Blair would have thought twice about going to war. He could have tipped the balance. And I think that the best memorial to these dead children is to ensure that this government brings in a crime of waging aggressive war so that future prime ministers will think twice, will be deterred from going to war for some love of America or American presidents when they know that it's unlawful and when they fear.
You say when they knew it was unlawful. The wording of the Chilcot report said it couldn't find it was unlawful, but my word, it came close.
It did. It came as close as a non-lawyer could be, I think, to finding it unlawful. I think you'll find any sensible, reasonable and honest lawyer would say that it was a breach of the UN Charter. None of the circumstances in which you're entitled to invade another country were present. Bush invented this doctrine that he called preemptive self-defense, which meant in effect that America could go to war to any against any country that it thought might one day pose a threat. So, and that was preposterous. And we went along, we were accomplices to an illegal invasion. There was simply no law in existence. It had been suspended, the law that punishes that kind of crime.
Very briefly, there would be no civil action open to the families.
There may be prospects of civil action, but certainly on the findings of Chilcot, there is no question, in my view, of any criminal conduct. It was a terrible mistake. It was not, because for technical reasons, a crime. It should be a crime, and if the families want a memorial to their children, they will insist that the government makes it a crime and ratifies. And Britain is under pressure, you see, from America. America doesn't want a crime of aggression to be an international crime, and they're putting pressure on Britain not to ratify. 30 countries have, another 30, most of our allies have said they're going to ratify. Britain's been utterly and disgracefully silent. So this is, I think, the way forward for the families to demand that the crime should be acknowledged, should be ratified, so that no Prime Minister, any Prime Minister in the future will think twice before going to war without Security Council support or the support of a genuine self-defence case.
Geoffrey Robertson, QC, thank you very much for joining us.